gaslighting, physical, mental, sexual and financial abuse, brutal family law disputes, custody battles, substance abuse, identity theft and shunning. There is one group of abused women whose stories are rarely shared, whose lives and livelihoods are in peril should they share their stories. Independent filmmaker and women's activist Vaishnavi Sundar has faced threats, protests and cancellations for giving a voice to these women and children. Behind the Looking Glass is a documentary that was released in September this year.
In a marriage where your partner started to use drugs or cheated on you, you would find therapists, support groups, and other women who would say, this is not your fault. But on this topic, people are very quick to question whether or not you responded to it correctly.
On the left, it's axiomatic that the untold stories will be told. This particular untold story, no one wants to hear.
Media should start to report on the patterns of behaviour endured by women and also report on male patterns of crime and violence which continue after transition.
You have to realise that your dad has fallen in love with himself and there's no part for you in that, where you're not just a prop.
Every action he takes still affects my kids, still affects me, still affects our financial situation.
I want women to be angry that we're not being listened to and that we're being lied about.
I would recommend that trans activists look at their behavior towards the now single mothers and domestic abuse survivors in the trans widow community and ask how gaslighting and insults and death threats and rape threats square with their mandate to be kind.
Why are they not listening to the voices of women?
Vaishnavi joins us today from Chennai, India. Welcome to Talk Straight.
Thank you so much for having me, Kath. It's such a privilege to be able to talk to you.
Great to join it. Great that you're joining us, Vaishnavi. So Behind the Looking Glass tells the stories of trans widows and trans orphans. Can you tell us what those words mean?
Sure, of course. Trans widows is a phrase that was coined by women whose partners or ex-husbands have opted to or are in the process of transitioning into the opposite sex. While I don't believe such a thing can be done, but this is the society that we live in right now. And these women have collectively called themselves trans widows because they feel widowed by this entire ideology and the fact that their partners have now considered themselves to be dead named if they are recognized or remembered as the name that they were born with. So in a sense, the phrase seems quite fitting. And trans orphans are pretty much the same thing, where there are children growing up in homes where the father has decided that he is now the child's mother, in which case the child considers herself to be orphaned by this man. And therefore they're left behind in a way that the society doesn't seem interested in what they're going through or to provide any form of redressal for this particular demographic.
So what happens to a woman when her husband and the father of her children, or even her own father, suddenly declares he is a woman?
I suppose the whole world comes to a halt for these people. And I think based on my research the past 3 years and the process of making the film, I have come to understand that it is an earth-shattering experience for these women because it is, one, it is not normal, and two, their entire life is turned upside down after such a declaration that comes with absolutely no forethought or consideration or empathy as to what the wife or the children might be going through. And to my understanding, every single woman that I have spoken with in the film, 18 of which you can see in the film, but there are about 40 or 50 women that I have spoken with, they declared that their life has come to a complete halt after this. They don't know what to do. They don't know if they should take care of themselves or they should protect their children. They don't know if the husband will take the child away. They don't know if they are financially dependent on the husband. They don't know if he will financially provide for them anymore. So there are a lot of questions, and they're forced to stay married and even call themselves a lesbian in such a situation. And if they say no, and if there is any form of domestic violence of any kind, irrespective of the trans identity, they are not allowed to speak about it because the society considers that to be something where the women are making it about themselves.
So the voices of trans widows and these trans orphans are rarely heard, and the stories seem to follow almost a playbook at times. So what is the sort of process of these men coming out or cracking their egg, as they say in trans lingo?
Sometimes it's really funny how similar it all is. It's like they have all read this one particular Reddit forum and they are all parroting the same exact words verbatim sometimes. It's always the case where they felt like they could be the opposite sex when they were really young, when they tried on their mother or their sister's underwear. I mean, I would find it so shameful to even declare this, but to be proud of it is another level altogether. But they all say the same thing, and that they had to suppress it because the society demands that they live up to their masculinity and all of those things, which the society does not. In most of these Western countries, dressing the way you want to and living your life is absolutely considered absolutely normal. In Global South, it's a completely different issue altogether. But then these men claim that they had to suppress it, and then they willfully, knowing this perversion that they have, marry, have children. And when the child and the mother and the wife is considerably dependent on this man, they declare this in a way that this wife or the child has absolutely nowhere else to go. So it seems to me that it is a planned endeavor, and they all seem to follow some sort of a playbook where somebody has written this online, a few books, some of these, very popular transsexuals who have written about their experience growing up feeling this way. They all seem to be saying the same thing. But it is quite an anomaly because either you felt like this your entire life, which means that you have lied to your current wife, or you felt like this all of a sudden, in which case you should have never pursued her in the first place, never married her, never had children, never had a family. So it's quite a contradiction, this whole ideology is.
So these women are effectively having, the rug of reality pulled out from under them. They're having to face the fact they might have been lied to and gaslit for the entirety of their relationships with their husbands. They're facing the breakdown of their marriage and their family. Their entire existence is upended. And as we know, normally if a woman is suffering at the hands of an abusive man, if she asks for help, the whole women's movement grinds into gear for them, but not in this instance. So what happens to these women if they don't celebrate their husband coming out as brave and stunning?
Oh, they are shunned, they are banished, they are not allowed to speak about their experience at all. And that is why even though this experience has been prevalent from the 1960s, 1950s, or even earlier, this is the first ever film made on this subject. And that speaks volumes about the situation of these wives and children, right? Because if it has been going on for several years, for many, many decades now, how is it that the experience of these women who didn't affirm these men and consider them brave and stunning, why aren't people, even out of idle curiosity, not interested in what these women are going through, what these women are experiencing? Like you mentioned, if it was domestic violence of any kind, drug abuse, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, marital rape of any kind, women's organizations are up in arms trying to help these women out of such a difficult situation. But the moment you say that the husband is trans-identified, even if he has done all of these things that are considered to be domestic violence otherwise, they suddenly take a backseat because then the husband's trans identity overpowers everything else. Now, whether they can come past it and speak about their experience is one thing. Even if they do, now we have these websites called transwidowsvoices.org. Many women have to write about their accounts anonymously because trans rights activists target them. They make sure that their voices are not heard. They make sure that their stories are not being told. Even now, after having posted our film online on YouTube and Twitter, many people reply to me saying, you have to cover both sides of the story. Why should I? You have heard their side of the story we've heard that for our entire lives. How is it that when I want to focus exclusively on the wives that don't stand by these men, I am suddenly considered to be biased? That's exactly this entire movement's attitude towards these wives is, I feel like.
Because there are certainly plenty of stories out there where you do see the men dress up to the nines as women and, you know, their wife next to them who's obviously affirming them. We've seen those stories for decades. But now, you know, we're covering the stories of the women who don't get to speak. And, you know, we're seeing some of the, and I would like to add that there are some very high profile men, even in this country, who have come out and they've enjoyed celebrity, they've been able to reinvent themselves. But it's very noticeable that oftentimes their wife and their children who they've abandoned go radio silent and we never hear their stories. And with some of these men...
And even if you...
Oh, go ahead.
I apologize. And even if you do hear about them in the early stages, right, where they are like seated next to this man and the man is talking about his female identity and about shopping and makeup and all of these things, you would see this wife sitting helplessly right next to him. He is almost controlling the words that come out of her mouth. You can just see it. It is so palpable in all of these interviews and videos, right? And after a point, 99.9% of the time, they are not together anymore. It eventually just frizzles away. She can't put up this charade for so long. The facade breaks down. The whole ideology crumbles because she can't lie to herself like this anymore. And even if she considers that she wants to be friendly or, you know, want to be in good terms, she can't call herself a lesbian when she is not. What kind of a society that we live in, where on the one hand, we talk about gay conversion therapy being horrible, and yet at the same time, you're forcing these heterosexual women to call themselves lesbian just because the person who's demanding you to do so is trans-identified and considers himself female. This is atrocious.
Well, some of these men, I mean, they're identifying as women. They now claim to be lesbians and force their wives into, you know, a same-sex relationship. And they even, as you pointed out before, they even claim to be the mother. So what sort of impact does this have on the children when the father starts identifying as a woman?
God, I spoke with Emma, who is the founder of Children of Transition, this just brilliant website where she is collecting accounts of children who are affected by this ideology, especially when their father comes out as trans, right? Now, the damage is enormous. Not only are you going through childhood wondering whether the reality that you see in front of you, the reality that you know, the reality that you absorb in front of you, is no longer the reality that you're allowed to speak about. Not only that, in some countries, the father has the right to go and change the details of the child's birth certificate. Now, it's one thing that he goes and changes his own birth certificate, but he goes and changes the certificate of the child, calls himself the mother in the child's birth certificate. Now, I don't think it's fair. All the child rights organizations, where are they? Why are they not being affected by the way this ideology is treating children? Why are they not considering this as child abuse? Now, they grow up wondering that it's probably their mistake, that they were not supportive enough of their father, and that's why the father became this way or something like that. All sorts of guilt, all sorts of negative feelings about themselves. And they end up making several bad decisions growing up. Some of them have ended up being abused by drugs, alcohol. Some of them ended up finding somebody who is an abusive partner. So this damage kind of lingers on, even if said parent is not in the child's life anymore. And the fact that they are forcing the children to call their father mother is, I think, our generation's most profound form of child abuse.
This is very much a new form of domestic abuse, of male violence against women, men pretending to be women and then blowing up their families. So on a final note, Vaishnavi, the work that you're doing is very important, but you're an independent filmmaker and producer in Lime Soda Films. So how can people find you and how can they support your work?
All my films are sort of available online for people to watch. I mean, the whole reason why I'm creating these films is to create awareness. It makes no sense to put it behind a paywall or make it difficult for people to access. And despite making it so available and despite making it accessible with 10 different language subtitles, the film does not have enough views as much as, say, I don't know, some documentary a bearded man would have made. That's the reality of our situation. Now, how people can help is by watching it, by sharing it, by adding comments and thoughts to their to the video. And also, if they can comfortably do so, they can also donate towards the project. My website is limesodafilms.com, and I'm available online as VAISHAX on X. Now, the reason why such donations will help is because the 18 women that you see in the film, I'm going to produce their individual stories and release them once every month as well. Now, while the film is over, the work has just started. So all the donations that come through now will help me keep producing these individual stories and make sure that one story would help some woman come away from her abusive marriage at some point.
Well, it's very important work that you're doing, Vaishnavi. So thank you so much for joining us on Talk Straight.
Thank you so much for having me, Kat.
So stay with us. We'll be back after this break.